and their families, and all who serve in our armed forces and their families. Without objection, 5-minute voting will continue. The question is on adoption of House Resolution 595. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. Yes. Have it. Good gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for a recorded vote. He didn't talk.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recording vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
Paul Barbagallo is a telecommunications reporter for Bloomberg BNA. Why are Republicans in the House pursuing a bill to overhaul the FCC?
Many Republicans in the House have been upset with how the FCC has conducted business as an independent federal agency. This dates back to the agency's consideration of net neutrality rules in 2010. Many Republicans, including Greg Walden and Fred Upton on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, have been displeased with how the FCC drafted those rules. Many believe that the agency was not as transparent as it could have been throughout that process, and they are seeking a legislative fix.
So what's the remedy they're proposing in this bill?
The most controversial provision in the bill would limit the concessions the FCC can require of companies seeking approval to merge. Under H.R. 3309, merger conditions must be, quote, narrowly tailored to remedy a harm that arises as a direct result of the specific transfer or transaction. And also the FCC would not be able to accept any voluntary commitments from merging companies that are outside the scope of its statutory authority. So, in other words, the FCC would really be hamstrung here in what they can do, what they can order merging companies to give up as a condition of their approval.
Has the FCC responded to some of these proposed changes?
They have testified before the House Energy and Commerce Committee. They have said that they have followed the Administrative Procedures Act, and they are also under the current chairman, Julius Janikowski. They have made efforts to be more transparent. They have eliminated outdated rules. They feel as though this legislation is unnecessary. However, the Republicans on the committee, well, the one Republican on the committee on the commission currently feels as though legislative action could help the agency be more open and transparent.
You talked about Republicans, specifically Representatives Walden and Upton, and their reasons for supporting the bill. How about Democrats? What are they saying in opposing the bill?
The Democrats are quite concerned, certainly on the House Energy and Commerce Committee and in the Senate. Obama has come out and opposed the bill. They feel as though many of the provisions would create a carve-out, a special exemption in the Administrative Procedures Act for the FCC, and it would severely limit the agency's ability to protect the public interest, to protect consumers by imposing conditions on mergers and transactions. They really feel that this would really cut the FCC's legs out.
What are the chances for the passage today in the House, and what's ahead in the Senate?
The bill is likely to pass the House, but most likely will be dead on arrival in the Senate. There is a companion in the Senate. Freshman Senate Commerce Committee member Dean Heller has a companion bill. But so far, no Democrats have signed on to that bill, and sources on the Senate side have said that Senator Rockefeller, chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee, has no intention of bringing the bill up anytime this year. So we're looking at passage in the House, but likely will be dead in the Senate.
An update on the FCC bill from Paul Barbagallo, who writes for Bloomberg BNA, telecommunications reporter. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
On this vote, the yeas are 242. The nays are 177. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Baucus, to suspend the rules and concur in the Senate amendment to H.R. 3606, on which the yeas and nays were ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3606, an act to increase American job creation and economic growth by improving access to the public capital markets for emerging growth companies.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and concur in the Senate amendment? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. On this vote, the yeas are 380, the nays are 41. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and passing H.R. 3298, which the clerk will report by title.
H.R. 3298, a bill to establish the position of Special Assistant for Veterans Affairs in the Department of Housing and Urban Development and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of our veterans across the length and breadth of America, I ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. Sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote. vote. The yeas are 414. The nays are 5, 2/3 being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The House will please come to order. Members will exit the well, take their conversations from the floor. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to a question of personal privilege.
The Chair has been made aware of a valid basis for the gentlewoman's point of personal privilege. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 1 hour.
Yeah, start right now. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to address an attack on my integrity and my reputation. Last week, Representative Darrell Issa, the chairman of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, on which I have served for many years, gave an interview to a newspaper in San Diego. The story was published on March 21, and it quoted the gentleman as accusing me of lying, knowingly and intentionally, during a hearing that was held before the Oversight Committee on February 16. That hearing received a significant amount of public attention because it addressed the issue of insurance for reproductive health care, yet included no witness testifying on behalf of the tens of millions of women across this country who seek access to coverage for reproductive health and contraception. I certainly understand that members on both sides of the aisle have different viewpoints on this issue, and I'm not here to discuss the underlying policy differences we may have. Today, I ask from Mr. Issa the same commitment I ask of myself, to always strive to hear from all sides of a debate without resorting to name-calling or attacks on the personal integrity of others. Even when we disagree with what others might say, we have an obligation to listen to them and respect their viewpoints. I am sure there are some who will accuse me of using these remarks to merely revisit the contraception issue. To the contrary, I am responding to statements published just last week by the gentleman from California, his arguments regarding my actions. In his recent interview on the hearing, Mr. Issa said this, to be absolutely clear, and I quote, "Carolyn Maloney then made the famous statement, 'Where are the women?' That was an outright lie, and she knew it when she said it," end quote. First of all, I would like to point out that what I actually offered was an outright question. I asked it as I sat there looking directly at an all-male panel, the panel that you see in this now famous picture. It is a picture that I believe is worth 1,000 words. And as I look at this picture again, my question is as pertinent and legitimate today as it was back then. Look at this picture and tell me, where are the women? If you can point to one woman on this first panel, then I will happily withdraw and offer my apologies to Mr. Issa. Just to make sure we have my question in context, let me repeat the remarks that I made that morning that Mr. Issa and some found so objectionable. I said, and I quote, "What I want to know is where are the women? I look at this panel and I don't see one single individual representing the tens of millions of women across this country who want and need insurance coverage for basic preventive health care services, including family planning and contraception. Where are the women?" End quote. I still maintain without fear of any contradiction there is no one on this panel who is a woman or who represents the tens of millions of women who want and need insurance basic coverage for family planning. Now, if Mr. Issa believes or tries to argue that that statement is somehow false because there were 2 women witnesses who appeared later that day on a second and separate panel, I would draw his attention to the fact that those witnesses were not there to represent the woman's point of view that is upheld primarily by the Democratic Party on this particular issue. Those Republican-appointed witnesses were there only to represent the interest of institutions. So even in surveying both panels, I don't see one single individual representing the tens of millions of women across this country who want and need insurance coverage for basic preventive health care services, including family planning. And in conclusion, I would like to say, Mr. Speaker, raising a point for personal privilege is sometimes accompanied by a call for a personal apology. Earlier today, Mr. Issa apologized to me, and he sent me this letter just an hour or 2 ago. I am encouraged by his actions, and I accept his apology. In the fallout of that unfortunate hearing, women were called far worse than liars. I know what I said that day, and I know it to be true. But I do think the Democratic witness, Sandra Fluke, and the women of America are owed an apology for denying them a voice, an apology for denying them a seat at the table. It was wrong then, and it is wrong each time that it happens. And it is especially wrong when women's health, women's lives, and women's rights are being discussed. And to cavalierly dismiss or deny that fact does greater damage to the fabric of democracy than words can ever redress. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Recorded votes on postponed questions will be taken later. The House will be in order. If members will please take their conversations from the floor. You all right with my starting here? For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 4239 to provide an extension of the federal aid highway safety, motor carrier safety, transit, and other programs funded out of the Highway Trust Fund, pending enactment of a multi-year law reauthorizing such programs as amended.
Report the title of the bill.
H.R. 4239, a bill to provide an extension of federal aid highway, highway safety, motor carrier safety, transit, and other programs funded out of the Highway Trust Fund, pending enactment of a multi-year law reauthorizing such programs.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Micah, and the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. Rahal, will each control 20 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first, Mr. Speaker, ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on H.R. 4239 as amended.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I also would ask unanimous consent that the exchange of letters between the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure and the Committee on Ways and Means be included in the congressional record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you. My colleagues and Mr. Speaker, this is a 60-day extension that has been agreed to by our leadership and negotiated with the other side of the aisle. I believe it will ensure the surface transportation programs at the Department of Transportation will continue to function and that we can continue programs across the country, ensure our men and women stay in jobs at such a difficult time with our economy again needing some reliability and transportation programs from this federal level. So with that, I urge a yes vote on H.R. 4239 as amended, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to H.R. 4239. This legislation is yet another example of the Republican leadership's my way or the highway approach to legislating. There was no consideration, consultation with anyone on this side of the aisle prior to this particular measure being introduced and scheduled for consideration. The extension is unduly long, and it ignores the fact that we do have a solution in hand in the form of a bipartisan Senate surface transportation bill, which passed the other body the week before last. With more than 2.7 million construction and manufacturing workers out of work, enough with the political games. With tens of millions more seeking a better life, it is far past time to stop the brinksmanship. As we approach the start of a construction season, we need to come together to pass a highway bill that will improve our infrastructure and, most importantly, create jobs. Instead, Republicans in the House continue their my way or the highway approach that is now leading to a kick-the-can-down-the-road extension. The other body has shown us the way. They passed an overwhelmingly bipartisan bill called MAP 21 with a vote of 74 to 22, with Senators Boxer and Inhofe leading the way across the ideological spectrum. The simple solution would be to take up that bill and pass it now. The President is prepared to sign it into law. Yet instead, we have before us another extension premised on the perverse notion that the Republican leadership will, over the next 60 days, garner enough votes on their side of the aisle to pass H.R. 7, the 5-year bill reported by the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. That committee reported H.R. 7 on February 13th. The Rules Committee approved a rule governing its consideration on the floor on February 15th. That was almost 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago. And during that time, the Republican leadership has failed to find the votes among its members to pass that bill. They do not have 218 votes, and they know it. So the question is, what difference do they hope to achieve over the next 8 weeks that they were unable to achieve over the past 6 weeks? Not much, in my view, because the right wing of their party is holding H.R. 7 hostage to their ideological jihad that the federal government has no business in supporting a national transportation system. On February 22nd, 1955, President Dwight Eisenhower stated, and I quote, "Our unity as a nation is sustained by free communication of thought and by easy transportation of people and goods. The ceaseless flow of information throughout the Republic is matched by individual and commercial movement over a vast system of interconnected highways crisscrossing the country and joining at our national borders with friendly neighbors to the north and south," end quote. Now, promoted by a Republican president and passed by a Democratic-controlled Congress, America sought greatness as it embarked on the construction of the interstate highway system in 1956. And America achieved it, creating a transportation system that was once the envy of the world. Yet H.R. 7 represents a full-scale retreat from that dynamic vision set forth 56 years ago. It mortgages America's future at subprime rates. It bankrupts the Highway Trust Fund and endangers the future long-term integrity of transportation programs. It destroys American jobs at a time when legions of Americans are desperately seeking work and trying to make ends meet. It is the wrong direction for America. This day should be a day of glory. It should be a day when this body displays the courage and conviction necessary to address the pressing transportation needs of this nation. Instead, it is a day of shame. It is a day when we are about to turn back the clock nearly a half-century on America's greatness and the incredible work we have done to grow our nation, to build a thriving economy, and to lead the global market. Unlike the House bill, which slashes funding and destroys 550,000 jobs, the other body's bill continues current funding levels, sustaining approximately 1.9 million jobs. Under the Senate bill, the states will receive $3.8 billion more in highway construction funding than the House bill over the course of 2 years. The Senate bill also eliminates many of the gaping loopholes in current law Buy American requirements, loopholes that are being exploited by foreign competitors like China, who are stealing American jobs. MAP 21, that's the Senate bill, includes critical elements of my Buy America bill, the Invest in America Jobs Act, and eliminates these loopholes to give American workers a fair shot. The Senate bill also does not contain poison pills like the House bill does, such as provisions to strip OSHA protections for hazmat workers and efforts to finance highway construction on the backs of middle-class workers. The Senate bill is not the bill I would have written, but it is a fair, bipartisan compromise, a word some in this body don't like to hear, especially on the other side, but a word that's necessary for legislating. It will provide the certainty that states need to invest and proceed with their plans long on the books. So again, I call upon the Republican leadership to schedule that bill for consideration by this body now. But in the spirit of compromise, again a word that's necessary in this body, I would remind the Republican word that it is a word in the dictionary, it is a word that Americans use daily, and I might consider supporting such a shorter extension than what is being proposed today. Not this lavish 60-day, 8-week extension, but rather one that keeps our noses to the grindstone and instills a sense of urgency that this matter deserves. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida.
Yielding myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker and my colleagues, let's deal with just a few facts. First of all, the fact is that this would be the 9th extension. The fact is that the Democrats on the other side of the aisle, when they controlled the entire House of Representatives, the United States Senate, the other body in a huge majority, and the White House, they did 6 extensions. That's the first fact. The second fact is that the folks from the other side of the aisle, when they controlled it, they weren't even able to get a bill from subcommittee to full committee. We passed it in committee, and we've gotten it this far to the floor. They did not pass it with huge majorities. Let's just deal with the facts. The facts are on June 17th, 2009, after my cooperating with the previous chair on the other side of the aisle to go forward with a long-term bill. It was President Obama who sent then Secretary Ray LaHood to tell us that they were going to kill a 6-year bill that we had agreed on to move forward, that they couldn't even get out of committee, to an 18-month extension. These are facts, and the fact is that they had 6,300 earmarks in the last bill, and they were open to earmarks in the bill that they were about to propose. This bill is being brought forward without tax increases, responsibly funded, with dramatic reforms, and again, devolving to the states and local governments who actually build these projects, the streamlining and other financial opportunities that they can take advantage of. The part about bankrupting the trust fund, let's deal again with facts. The facts are that the bill that is proposed by the other body is a 2-year bill, and the trust fund money expires in 18 months. That's not responsible. The bill we brought out has a pay-for. The comments that we're slashing, we are continuing at current levels. It's $52 billion for 5 years. Do the math, it's $260. The Senate bill is $109 billion, it's 54.9. We aren't increasing spending at a time that we shouldn't be increasing spending, but we're maintaining a current level. So they count no increase as a cut. That's the kind of math that's going on here. So I came to the floor because there was a bipartisan agreement between the leadership of the House and the Senate to move forward because we have to get people to work. Came here, and this is my 3rd extension. I have had the honor and privilege of chairing the committee for, 14 months now, and I have cooperated with the other side, including holding extensive hearings. The first, and a gentleman who just spoke, Mr. Rahall's district in Beckley, West Virginia, all the way to the West Coast. Dozens of hearings out in the field and here in Washington to try to develop legislation that could get the job done, and that we can do more with even the same amount of money and put people to work at a time in our country's history. So those are the facts, and I reserve the balance of my time. Actually, let me yield to Mr. Duncan, the chair of the subcommittee, 4 minutes, if he'd like, 4 minutes.
Gentleman from Tennessee.
How much time do we have before we do that?
15 minutes.
Oh, easily 4 or 5 to the gentleman from Tennessee, the chair of the Highway Subcommittee. Thank you.
Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding me this time, and I thank him for his leadership of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. H.R. 4239 extends the surface transportation programs through May 31st, 2012. At funding levels consistent with the fiscal year 2012 Transportation Appropriations Bill passed last November. This extension is clean and does not add any policy provisions. Without this extension, Mr. Speaker, these programs are set to expire this Saturday. This legislation will allow the highway and transit programs to continue to operate as the spring construction season kicks off. During this 2-month extension, we fully expect the House to pass H.R. 7, the American Energy and Infrastructure Jobs Act of 2012, and conference this bill with the Senate's 18-month reauthorization bill. H.R. 7, as Chairman Mike had just noted, is a 5-year reauthorization bill that provides the long-term funding at current levels. It provides predictability that the states and localities need and have requested to plan major transportation projects and critical improvements to their transportation systems. Additionally, H.R. 7 eliminates or would eliminate wasteful federal programs and put important decision-making power back in the hands of the states. There is no reason to have a bureaucrat in Washington dictating which projects should be funded in my home state of Tennessee or other states. Federal aid transportation projects around the nation are sitting idle because of inefficient and unnecessary project review requirements. H.R. 7 goes the extra mile by streamlining the project review process and eliminating scores of unnecessary federal requirements. My constituents in the 2nd District of Tennessee and throughout this nation want a more efficient and smarter process for investing our federal transportation dollars, and H.R. 7 would accomplish that by doing more with less. We need to speed up these highway projects. The last 2 studies by the Federal Highway officials have estimated that it takes 13 years. One said 13 years, one said 15 years from conception to completion. All these other developed nations around the world are doing these projects in a half or a third of the time that we are. We've got to speed things up to become more globally competitive. When Congress sends H.R. 7 to the President, it will be considered the signature jobs bill that Americans have been waiting for Congress to pass. Just this week, Time magazine has a cover which describes our recovery as wimpy. Yesterday, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, Chairman Bernanke, said that the job market continues to remain weak. This bill, H.R. 7, if we could pass it, will create millions of jobs for hardworking Americans right here in the United States, not in China or India, and will leave a lasting impact of tangible improvements to our transportation infrastructure. By passing the long-term reauthorization bill that the business community and the state and local officials across this country want, Americans will be able to see their tax dollars going towards rebuilding and strengthening our nation's highways, bridges, and transit systems. In addition, we need, people all over this country want us to stop rebuilding other countries and start doing what we need, rebuilding our own country and putting our own citizens first once again. I urge my colleagues to pass this brief two-month extension so that the House can continue to work and then pass H.R. 7, the long-term reauthorization reform bill that this country needs. And, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time to Chairman Mica.
Gentleman from Florida reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 5 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Oregon, the ranking member on our Subcommittee on Highways and Transit.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank the gentleman. Well, the Republicans got the wheel hard over, pedal to the metal. They're spinning donuts, and they want another 90 or 60 days. It was 90 days yesterday, 60 days today to spin donuts till they run out of fuel on their side of the aisle. Look, the Senate, the most dysfunctional previous to this leadership legislative body in the land, has passed a bill, a 2-year bill with reforms and streamlining, with half of the Republican senators, including some members of the Flat Earth Caucus, voting for it. 74 votes in the Senate. Nothing gets 74 votes in the Senate. But you're refusing to bring that bill up because we might get something done around here. So how about another 60 days to spin your wheels? Well, there was a little bit of history. Let's have a little bit of history here. February 8, 2011, Chairman Mica will have a surface transportation bill by the August recess. That was, what, 2011? Oops. Well, then, 2011, August, Chairman Mica, I will agree to 1 additional highway program extension. Oops. He's asking for yet another, and today, yet another. Well, then, spin forward quickly to November 2011. Speaker Boehner, House will pass a highway bill this year. That was last year. Then we go forward to February 1st, 2012. Here's the problem. They got a bunch of people on their side who hate government so much that they're willing to destroy the National Transportation Program to kill it. We are not making the claim, Speaker Boehner, that spending taxpayer money on transportation projects creates jobs, huh? They hate government so much, they will say that investment by the government in building a national transportation system and maintaining it and rebuilding it with Made in America requirements does not create jobs. Why would he say that? Because they got 80 people on their side of the aisle who do not believe we should have a national transportation plan or policy. They're willing to let our roads, bridges, and highways crumble. This is pre-Dwight David Eisenhower, Republican president, National Highway System Program. This is the brand spiffy new Kansas Turnpike ended in this farmer's field on the Oklahoma border. This went on for years because Oklahoma didn't deliver its section. They want to go back to those good old days. No federal mandates, no federal transportation system. Oh, okay, so the Port of Los Angeles should, and people of Southern California should pay for everything that relates to getting freight in and out of L.A. Doesn't affect the rest of the United States of America, or the Port of Portland, or the Port of Seattle, or the ports on the East Coast. Our competitor nations get it. They're spending, they're investing. Even countries with austerity programs like Britain, they're putting people back to work, despite what the Speaker had to say to the Flat Earth Caucus over there. It does create jobs and investment. We need to move forward. Now, they're saying, oh, no problem, just another temporary delay while we get our act together on our side of the aisle. Well, again, we already heard the statement, no more, only one more temporary extension. That was about 9 months ago. And we're finding now that actually the delays are costing jobs. The uncertainty costs jobs. States can't make commitments for major projects and investments if they don't know if there's going to be federal money there in 90 days. 90 days? 60 days, I forgot. In 60 days. They're going to plan a long-term project that can last 60 days. No, I don't think so. So North Carolina, the Secretary of Transportation says the delays have cost 41,000 jobs. Seems a little high to me, but Nevada, 4,000 jobs. Maryland, 4,000 jobs. Michigan, 3,500 jobs. Added up across the country. Even use the low numbers. We're talking tens of thousands of job opportunities lost because they can't get their act together. Just let us vote on the Senate bill. That's all we're asking. I mean, I think there might be a few people on your side of the aisle who would agree with their Republican colleagues in the Senate and support it, and I can guarantee we'd get almost every Democrat on this side of the aisle to vote for it. You can't even get your own people to vote for your own bill. You're wrapped around the axle in your caucus day after day. You have to pretend it won't create jobs. Well, that's not enough for him. Paul Ryan has now proposed in the budget, which we're going to vote on next, that we should decrease funding in transportation by 35%, but you're saying over there you want to continue the current levels. Well, you better get it together, because if you're going to support the Ryan budget, then you've just voted to cut transportation beginning October 1st by 35%. That's about 500,000 jobs, but what the heck? You guys hate government so much, you hate America so much, that you won't do what's necessary to put this country back together, to rebuild the infrastructure that was given to us by Democrats and Republicans alike for more than half a century, never in a partisan way. This is the first experiment, the first attempt to pass a totally partisan bill, and you're failing on your own side of the aisle.
Time has expired. The Chair will remind members to address their comments directly to the Chair. Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased at this time to yield to the chair of our rail subcommittee, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Schuster, 4 minutes.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the chairman. Listening to the last speaker, I believe that the other side of the aisle has got a case of amnesia. Because I was here in 2007 and 2011 when they had the majority in the House, the majority in the Senate, and the presidency, and they did nothing. Well, that's not true. In fact, the last speaker, the gentleman from Oregon, he was the chairman of the Highway Subcommittee, and we passed a bill by voice vote out of the subcommittee, a Democratic version, voice vote. That means it came out of subcommittee in a bipartisan way. Now, there was a lot in that bill I didn't like. But it was probably what the gentleman, the last speaker, and the majority party wanted to do, is that's expand government control of the highway system, expand the decision-making process to the bureaucrats in Washington instead of allowing the people in the states to make more of those decisions. So it's startling to me to hear all the criticism and insults hurled at our side of the aisle. I do take offense to the fact they said we hate America. We love America. We love the American people and the wisdom of the American people and the wisdom of those in state government to make decisions also. Now, I'm not one that wants to I believe there is a national role in the transportation system of this country. It is a national policy. It's based on our founding. It's our history. We've always been part of this national system. So I want to pass a bill, a 5-year bill. I don't believe my colleagues have gone home and listened to their DOT directors and the people that build roads and sell equipment and the business people. They want a 5-year bill. They do not want a 2-year bill because they won't make decisions on expanding their businesses, buying equipment, hiring people on an 18-month bill. And oh, by the way, by the time we pass it, if we pass the Senate bill, it would be a 17 or 16-month bill. It's just another extension. It doesn't have reforms in it. Our bill does reform. It will allow that $260 billion to be spent faster. And anybody that's been in business, and had to deal with the day in and day out knows that time is money. If it takes 14 to 15 years to build a highway versus 7 or 8, that's going to cost us a lot more money. That's common sense. That's why this bill, this 5-year bill, is a common-sense bill, and we need to pass it. But I've come here to the floor today not to debate the 5-year bill because I believe it's the best way to go, but I've come here to support the bipartisan agreement. I thought it was a bipartisan agreement. I guess we'll find out shortly. A bipartisan agreement for a 60-day clean extension that will give us the time to move forward and put a sensible, common sense, I should say, bill on the floor that will encourage growth in America. It will encourage people to hire and invest in their businesses when they're building roads and bridges in this country. And failing to pass this extension is really not an option. So I hope that my friends will get behind this extension and pass it so that we can work to pass a bill that makes a lot of sense, and that is H.R. 7, that will help to create jobs. Again, I need to remind my colleagues, if they're watching this, or the colleagues in the chamber, 2007 to 2011, our Democratic colleagues that controlled both branches of government, both houses of Congress, did not pass a highway bill. They passed a stimulus bill that didn't work, that had only 8% of it went to highway and infrastructure projects, which we as Republicans offered an alternative, half of the amount of money that the Democrats passed, and half of that money going to rebuilding our infrastructure. If they truly cared about rebuilding the infrastructure of this country, they would have passed a highway bill in 2007 to 2008, or excuse me, 2007 to 2011, but they failed to do it, and now they've come to the floor to criticize our side, and we worked very, very hard. The Chairman Mike has put together a bill that really does do reform, significant reform, and I don't know why the other side resist reform when we can spend money quicker, we can get that money out there and rebuild the roads and bridges we need today. So that I yield back.
Gentleman from Florida reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from West Virginia.
May we have a time check, please, Mr. Speaker?
8.5 minutes remain on the gentleman for West Virginia's time, and the gentleman from Florida